So you're probably familiar with that saying. It's something like, you can do this like it's a burden, or you can do this as part of the dance. I don't know who originally said that. It might have been Ram Dass. But basically, this gets at a theme that I keep being called back to, which is about right effort. And the basic idea here with that quote is that, you'll be putting in the time or effort anyway, so you might as well put it towards or on the path that you most care about. Or at least this is one interpretation of that quotation. And I just feel really called to talk about this again. I did make one other video kind of explicitly about this, which I will link to. But in this video, I wanted to just mention that there's at least like four levels, I guess I would say, when we want to think about this path of like putting our efforts in where they most matter. And of course, we don't mean that in the sense of like, time prioritization, like that you might get from like the productivity gurus, although that's like important. We mean this on the deeper level of the existential core of what your soul really cares about, which is what it came here to learn. And so I think there's like four levels that, or stages maybe, if you will start noticing as you pursue that line of interest, let's say. And so a lot of people might think about this in terms of purpose. Yeah, it's similar, right? But we can distinguish between maybe like life purpose versus soul purpose. And I guess ideally, you really want those to align. But of course, you may not have noticed like a difference between these until maybe later in life, where you see that you thought you had a pretty clear life purpose, and maybe you were right on about that, right? Like the children that you had, the specific like job career path that you may have pursued fulfilled some very important 3D functions or roles, let's say. But then there's a soul purpose too. So the path here that I would start talking about is in terms of, like, it does sound like finding your purpose, but rediscovering your purpose at a deeper level, maybe. So yeah, you want to start with curiosity, right? So for people who are feeling like absolutely lost, or this is after some kind of like super dark night of the soul, and you're feeling completely directionless, like you want to start with these gentle levels of like, what are you curious about? For example, for me, when I was in that place and it was really bad, like I found myself, as a lot of people do, I'm sure, like you go back to the basics, like you go back to the most basic facts about your life. And in my case, of course, I've always been super interested in like nutrition and like proper eating, or at least what's right for my body. And so that counts as curiosity, right? And that's worth following. But then there's also, deeper than that, there's something that we would see more as like passion, or maybe before passion, even maybe a special interest, or maybe those feel the same to you. But that would be, this is something that you keep returning to over and over. So for me, the nutrition is like more than just like curiosity. So in this level too, with like passion or your special interest, it's likely that, if you've had some prior experience with this, whether you want to think about that in terms of a prior lifetime, or there are just other, maybe simultaneous lifetimes, however you want to think about this, there are other ways that you already have information about that. There's a reason it's like your special interest. And then maybe even on a deeper level still, or like having a wider perspective on this, and it still may dovetail with the first two depending on how deeply you pursue these, I would say is something like having like a cause or some kind of more collective concern that you orient yourself towards, that you invest yourself towards. And everyone is going to have a different one, and this could also build on, these kinds of passions, special interests that you have for a very specific reason, because you have gifts in that area. And that's why it doesn't make sense to think that everyone should be, pursuing the exact same cause that you champion, or that you will, you know, do activist work towards, right? Everyone's called into a specific area because everyone has specific knowledge in certain areas. So that's completely natural. And it's like, it makes sense, right? And then beyond that, still though, I would still talk about another level, which is what I would say it even feels like it's beyond having like a functional purpose, because that's when you really start, this now crosses more over into like the domain of like what your soul is here to uh remember, at least at first, before you start pursuing like what your soul is here further to learn. So there's like those two distinctions. And so an example of this might be, for example, maybe it doesn't look really productive on the surface in our usual 3D sense of what looks productive, or even the idea of like being productive, right? What we're trying to get at is purpose, right? Rather than like productivity. And so you may feel called to actually just like spend a lot of time with yourself, right? Like this is what we mean when we talk about healing, right? All of these areas that we will go into that are for restoring our own wholeness and our own memory of like who we are. And that's highly, eminently purposeful from a soul perspective. And so one weekend you may be called to just like sit with your feelings, and whether this is through conscious meditation or simply like being present with yourself and not like rushing and using external timelines and being disturbed, but just like resting in your own peace and like receiving your intuition and learning what your body is telling you and what your soul is trying to guide you towards. And so, just returning to that quote that I opened with, you can do this like it's a burden, or you can do this like it's part of the dance. And again, what that really refers to for me is putting in the right efforts, putting in effort. And again, I did a video on this earlier or late last year, but this is really it comprises like one of, I think, seven um specifically like Buddhist paths for spiritual development. I think there's a couple other ones called, like, I think compassion is one, grace might be another one, and the one that I have been really drawn to, maybe you would too, but you can look at my other video for the other ones, is the path of diligence. And so this is about putting in right effort and overcoming a specific kind of existential laziness. And so the thing with each of these paths that kind of set them up for this spiritual transformation as vessels for that, it's really like a yoga, right? You're yoking together the higher and the lower. So on this path, you're yoking together the perspectives from your higher self, what your soul sees as soul purpose, what you need to learn next on that level, and you're yoking it with like the lower body, the lower vessels of your nature. So this would be everything that's relating to your human existence, like not just your body, but also all of the mental conditioning that you've experienced in your life so far, because of the circumstances of how you grew up. So that's your lower body. And this is about this overcoming the laziness, is about overcoming your, I'm now calling it like homeostatus quo, right? It sort of builds on the idea of homeostasis, which is explicitly physiological, but it can extend into other systems, right? It's a larger concept. And socially, right? So homeostatus quo, and overcoming your laziness means knowing your tendencies to feel like I'm tired, that can be a form of laziness. It can be a habit to feel tired when actually you could still be putting in more effort. And I just want to preface this by saying, like, of course, from our little, productivity criticism context, I understand that about, capitalism kind of overdrives everybody. So this isn't exactly the same, because remember, this is the more spiritual level of like putting in the right efforts, right? So not falling asleep on the wrong things, right? So this is not about like, don't take breaks, don't rest. This is about don't sleep on yourself, don't sleep on your soul. And look, I've already done this like at least once, depending on how I view it, maybe twice already in my life. And, you'll feel it. I think you feel it when you get close, and then, you can experience a certain kind of like, what's the word? Like, not a stage, but like a certain kind of period of stress. And you really have to push through that kind of place of stress to really get to that next level. And I remember when I was really dealing with this in like a hard way, I was reading Seth Godin had that little book that came out called The Dip, and it was very ambiguous. I found it didn't answer anything, right? It sounded very tautological to me. It's like, knowing when you need to persist or when you need to kind of like gracefully leave, which is not really the same as like dropping out or quitting or giving up and all of these things, but just understanding how to properly redirect your energy. Anyways, it might be worth revisiting that book, or if you haven't at all. But anyways, I'm just relating that I've been there. And I would add too, just to like start closing this out, that another aspect of this kind of pursuit of right effort or investment of right effort would be learning better how to literally shape our energy in the strategic direction that we need. So, not just about the investment, but like, or the intensity, but the intention, which actually shapes the way you focus that energy. So, this can be really subtle too if you haven't really sat down to think about it on that level, right? Rather than just accepting external guidelines for like how you should be investing your soul energy. And so, what does it look like? What does this look like? Soul purpose, soul investment, soul effort, soul stamina. It's about this core level where you have to kind of try on a level that brings in your courage and your vulnerability. This is not just about using your low hanging fruit, those easy gifts that you were born with because you had them already in a past life. This is about using and developing the new gifts that you're specifically here to learn, right? Like, you can coast for quite a while on a lot of innate gifts that everybody comes in with, right? But then there comes a point where you start to uncover more of your soul's direction, or you can, see it as your higher self calling you in a specific direction, and you're being called to learn different things. You're being called to make investments that maybe require more like courage or vulnerability from you. And that's soul effort and that's soul stamina, right? To pursue and continue that, even in the face of all the other kinds of accidents that are going to happen along the way. And so the fatigue in that spiritual sense is like the giving in, really, almost to these easy narratives that tell you like why you should give up. So let me know how that resonates for you guys. I just want to add here too that this is the place where our own soul stamina comes in, and this is where purpose really relates a lot to the ways in which we want to talk about manifestation. Because as we're bringing in, literally, we're bringing in a new spiritual reality for ourselves. We're bringing in a new synthesis, a new integration, which I talk about, that doesn't have counterparts in the 3D yet. So there is no evidence by definition, right? And that really relates a lot with like how we talk about manifestation, because you need to like become the change before you can see it in the 3D. And I think that that's just the same thing. That's literally all we're already talking about. And then there's like higher or more noble ways of like using this power too, right? I saw someone the other day comparing this kind of spiritual discussion with hustle culture, and saying that they're basically talking about the same blueprint or something. And so, to some degree, yes. I mean, everything is a creation. Like, we are choosing to create one thing or another. And it's really about what level is this coming from? What level are we doing this from? Is it just like, I want to see such and such numbers in my bank account? Or I want to see like just specific changes in, for my activist cause, which is great. Or am I going to really focus on remembering what my soul wants me to remember while I'm here and learning what I need to learn while I'm here? So it's all about the level and the register that you want to work on. So let me know what you guys think of this. Drop a comment below with any thoughts, questions. If you've had this experience too, where you came into this distinction where you realized this difference between your life purpose and your soul purpose. Or if maybe that's where you are right now. If something seems confusing about that, just drop a comment or question below. I will read them all, respond. And yeah, definitely give this a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and check out some of my earlier videos. Get on my list, and we'll keep talking. Okay, thanks.